This is going to be a massive update on Russia. Not only are we going to talk about the ICC and the Putin arrest warrant, but we're also going to talk about what this means for China, Iran, the United States, World War III. It's all not good, but there are a ton of updates, so let's get everything covered now. Keep in mind, all of these videos and all of this information and research is brought to you thanks to the support of you for the amazing programs that I have linked down below on Building Your Wealth. You get lifetime access to those. We've got a coupon expiring on March 22nd, so you get the best pricing now guaranteed going forward, so the pricing will never be lower, guaranteed. And we keep adding value. So if you want to learn how to become a millionaire in real estate, investing in stocks, making more money at your job, LLCs, liability protections, insurances, you have questions, come to me, come in our course member live streams, and I'll help you out personally. Well, it's happened. The International Criminal Court, the ICC, has issued an arrest warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin, along with other officials at the Kremlin over war crimes in Ukraine. Quote-unquote alleged war crimes in Ukraine. The arrest warrants were issued based on evidence presented by the ICC prosecutor, which provided reasonable grounds to believe that the suspects, Putin, are responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity in the context of the invasion of Ukraine. An example of this would be potentially and intentionally maybe aiming weapons and ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, at apartment buildings to essentially engage in total war. Total war is very importantly different from just regular war. Regular war, think about it kind of like Revolutionary Day times, like 1776, you're walking up with your drums and you're lining up in the battlefield and you're fighting. That's sort of like battlefield warfare. Same thing happens to some degree in parts of the Middle East. When that expands to an attacker attacking a city and then purposefully killing civilians and attacking apartment buildings or schools, that is considered total warfare. That's basically saying everybody on the other side is against us. We will attack everyone. That is being deemed a war crime. In a report by CBS, they quote the ICC saying the evidence collected so far is clear. The Russian Federation is responsible for the commission of heinous crimes, including murder, torture, and attacks against civilians. Now, we've also got to cover what's going on with Russia and China in terms of the latest regarding Ukraine, jets, China. We'll cover all of that. But let's first just cover the ICC and then move on from there. So, the Associated Press has also been looking into the use of prohibited weapons in civilian areas, which would be another war crime. However, it's also worth noting that the issuance of these arrest warrants really raises question about the impacts of this. Some people are suggesting that these ICC warrants are A, going to be entirely worthless, and B, potentially put a new spin on Xi Jinping visiting Russia. Because remember, Xi Jinping was going to go from China to Russia to try to potentially negotiate a settlement between Russia and Ukraine. Well, now these ICC charges potentially implicate Xi Jinping if he goes to Russia to visit with Vladimir Putin, and Vladimir Putin's facing charges, and Xi Jinping goes over there and visits them, sort of ignoring these potential charges. And so there's a wonder that, is it possible that these ICC charges could inflame negotiation attempts that Xi Jinping is trying to create between Russia and Ukraine? The Wall Street Journal is citing that this is the first time a sitting head of state has been subject to an arrest warrant from the ICC. On Twitter, there have been plenty of responses asking why George Bush, for his Operation Iraqi Freedom, hasn't faced ICC charges. But then again, Twitter can tend to be very jaded, dare I say. There are also reports that the Russian government has of course denounced these, and the quote that is being reported is absolutely absurd and groundless. There's evidence from the BCC that part of the motivation for these ICC charges are simply the scale of civilian casualties. and the destruction of civilian infrastructure, such as purposefully launching rockets against electricity grids, nuclear power generators to purposefully take control over the power grid in Ukraine. Reuters is explaining the ICC relies on the cooperation of member states to enforce these arrest warrants. It does not have its own police force. So in other words, like a NATO or whatever would have to arrest Vladimir Putin, which, yeah, that wouldn't knock on the door of World War III at all. The warrants have been transmitted to relative state authorities under the Rome Statute to locate, arrest, and transfer the suspects to the ICC for charges. So here's how this works, a little bit of background. When the ICC issues an arrest warrant, it represents a formal request to authorities throughout the world to arrest the individual subject or suspected of committing serious crimes and bring them to the International Community Court, or the ICC, International Criminal Court, to face charges. So in other words, find him, arrest him, and bring him to court. In such cases as when the warrant remains outstanding, the ICC continues to seek cooperation from all the member states to bring the person to justice. And basically, there's like a 6-part process for this. Identify the suspects, issue the warrant, that's been done, work with member states to locate, arrest, and transfer, execute the warrant, actually arrest the person, before the trial, confirm the charges against the person, redetermine, do we still have sufficient evidence, has anything changed, then commit, or basically conduct a trial. So once the charges are confirmed, the case would basically proceed in the manner of a trial before a trial chamber, the ICC trial chamber. The prosecution would then present evidence, call on witnesses, and make their arguments much like a regular court. This trial chamber from the ICC could then impose a sentence, including imprisonment or massive financial penalties. Now, the ICC Criminal Court, I feel like it would be a lot cooler if it was one of those things out of like a Marvel movie. The ICC Criminal Court doesn't actually look that fancy. It's basically a pretty generic tribunal with a desk and some kind of like generic wall. We have a picture of it here. That resolution is too small. I'll pull up a large resolution photo of this in just a moment. But really, it's interesting because it's the first time, as we've said, that a head of state who's actively a head of state right now has been charged while still being the leader of a country. So we'll see what happens, but I do think the implications for China here are very interesting. This is what the tribunal looks like. Looks kind of cold. I feel like they need to have like some kind of like crazy marble staircase and massive marble monument back there to make it a little bit more intimidating. But anyway, this is the ICC, and this is going to lead to a lot of questions for what does this mean for China's potential negotiations with not only Vladimir Putin, but also Zelensky. It kind of makes me wonder. I put on a little bit of the jaded hat. I kind of wonder, and this is total speculation, okay? But total speculation, okay? Joe Biden. Hey, ICC. I hear Xi Jinping is coming over to negotiate a resolution. We don't want him to negotiate a resolution. File some charges. Make it harder for Xi Jinping to go over there. All right, thank you. Bye. And then it happened. Like, I hate to say I'm a little jaded on that. Okay. But there's a whole lot more to cover. Remember, get life insurance. 5 minutes. Link down below. Apple or Android, pay for it. My wife has asthma. Got it instantly. Amazing service. metkevin.com/life. In this video, we got to talk about what just happened between Russia and that fuel dump on the drone. We have actual video of it now. Actual video of the Russian fighter jet dumping fuel on that American drone that was downed over the Black Sea, a very strategically important region for not only Russia, in terms of being able to have a buffer between them and Ukraine and use it as a supply route, but also massively important for the exports of commodities such as grains like wheat, and also a region that the United States surveils heavily for the benefit of NATO and the NATO alliance. It's also going to be very important to analyze relations between Russia and China. Xi Jinping potentially heading to visit Vladimir Putin potentially to mediate a negotiated settlement between Russia and Ukraine. But we've got a lot to talk about regarding China and their arms dealing. So let's get caught up on everything, starting with the entertainment of the day, which is video of the Russian fighter jet, the Sukhoi Su-27, a twin-engine, super-maneuverable aircraft that was first built in 1985. So it's the old crap. Dumping fuel on the U.S. Reaper drone that costs about $62.5 million per drone in today's inflated dollars. Cost about half as much before we got through all this inflation. Cost around $32 million previously. Now costs somewhere around $62 million. The Reaper drone has been in service with the U.S. Air Force since 2007 with substantially advanced capabilities. And here is said video. Shout out to this dude, OSINT Technical. Anyway, official footage released by the U.S. Air Force of the collision between the Sukhoi jet and the MQ-9 drone. Ready for it? Here we go. By the way, the smoking that you're going to see coming out of the jet is fuel. Jet fuel. Here it comes. And the drone locks onto motion with the video. And here comes the fuel dump activated. Boom. And the propeller for the drone stops. And unfortunately, the video then stops. But this drone goes bye-bye after that. Now, that's actually really interesting because the Russians were arguing that the Sukhoi actually escorted the MQ-9 Reaper drone before the Reaper drone crashed. That was the Russian argument. So again, the Russians are arguing that this is an escort. In fact, 2 state awards have been given to the pilots who did this escorting of the American Reaper drone. That's some nice escorting you got there. Yeah, it got crop dusted, exactly. Yeah, so that's Russia for you. That's Russian propaganda for you, showing you that Russia is providing awards for escorting a drone that they actually basically just downed. I mean, they may as well have just shot a rocket at it, but this was sort of I suppose, a less inflammatory way of crashing that drone. All right. Anyway, questions are now resulting over the operation that could take weeks and potentially cost tens of millions of dollars to actually salvage this drone, which could be down in the depths of the Black Sea, as low as the height of 5 Eiffel Towers standing on top of each other, basically a kilometer down. The drone is expected to be broken up into a lot of pieces. It's a very dangerous area to actually be working in. At the same time, Mr. Putin is working with China. And apparently Xi Jinping is trying to play a mediating role in basically some form of settlement between Russia and Ukraine. We've talked about that before, and the Chinese foreign minister is urging both sides to, quote, exercise restraint and resume peace talks. This is somewhat old news, but this is escalating. And the reason these talks are escalating is because Xi Jinping actually wants to visit Vladimir. At the same time, though, we have some potential issues when it comes to weapons. This isn't great. China providing military aid to Russia is something that's creating a lot of fear, because even though China had previously been sending military equipment such as aircraft parts and reconnaissance equipment to Russia, sending lethal equipment has actually been a red line for China up until recently. China just sent companies, Russian entities, 1,000 assault rifles and other equipment such as body armor and drone parts. Shipments took place, apparently, that we're just now finding out, between June and December. China North Industries Group, a huge state-owned defense contractor, apparently sent the rifles to a Russian company which does business with the Russian state military. So actually, what's been happening is there's been fear in the media about China sending actual lethal weapons to Russia. Turns out that's kind of what's already been happening anyway, except it's been sort of B to B and then B to M, business to military. Apparently, they're sending CQA rifles, which are similar to the M4A1 rifles, close replica, they call them. They've been considered civilian hunting rifles. They do shoot 5.56 NATO rounds. Russian entities also received 12 shipments of drone parts by Chinese companies and over 12 tons of Chinese body armor, and they send this stuff through Turkey. It's the same way our sort of chip sanctions against Russia aren't working. The chips just end up getting funneled through Kazakhstan or other countries. Customs data doesn't actually show this sort of information. Instead, China supplies this as unreported dual-use equipment. So it's sort of some loophole, basically, to hide from customs reports. And so the question here now is the United States going to respond with more sanctions, and would those actually do anything? Unlikely. That is the problem. Because after all, remember, we know that these countries are really adept at navigating around our sanctions and export and import controls by using other countries who are not subject to those sort of controls. So I'm not entirely sure this is very surprising. But I suppose what is surprising is that while we thought it would be new that China would send lethal weapons, they've already been doing exactly that. At the same time, NATO is sending Ukraine jets, or at least ramping up to do so. Poland will apparently be the first country to do so. They're going to send Soviet-era MiG-29 fighter jets, 4 fully operational jets. This is coming after talk that Poland and European nations would send tanks, but not jets. Definitely not jets. Well, now the MiGs are potentially actually going to be sent as soon as a week from now to Ukraine. These MiG-29s cost about $20 million each. More jets will be handed over, but are currently, quote-unquote, under maintenance. Ukraine already has experience using these MiG-29s. Obviously, some refreshers will probably be useful. There are Ukrainian fighter pilots actually training in the United Kingdom right now to get ready potentially for US F-16s. Those cost about $64 million each, or about a little more than 3 times as much as those MiGs. Poland, once they get rid of their old crap, are going to buy new F-35 Generation 5 jets, the good new stuff. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin each face massive industrial backlogs. $175 billion for Raytheon, $150 billion of backlogs of manufacturing for Lockheed Martin. That's billion. Okay, remember, a Gen 5 jet might cost $65 million, say, round it for a little bit easier math. If you've got a $150 billion backlog, gosh, how many planes could you manufacture with that? That would be somewhere around 2,300. Wow. If I did the math right, that's incredible. The U.S. has already sent, but they're not just making jets, right? They're making a lot of equipment. Previously, Ukraine had asked for tanks, which was initially deemed ridiculous because they might invade Crimea with it, or try to take back Crimea, should I say. Now, fighter jets could be used to potentially attack Russian air bases on Russian soil. This is actually something that even Elon Musk is trying to avoid, because Elon Musk suggests that, hey, we're not going to allow Starlink near the border of Ukraine because we're trying to avoid a World War III. Now, at the same time, Goldman Sachs is actually raising their GDP forecast for China to 6%. Goldman is predicting that there will be essentially a plunge in oil levels that could create a recession over here, but potentially strengthen Chinese markets. Goldman is was the first bank to predict no more rate hikes for the American market. And by raising their Chinese forecast, they actually seem somewhat bullish on China over the next year and sort of this reopening. They are trimming a little bit of their 2024 outlook from a 5% guide to 4.6%. But they actually think the reopening is going stronger in China than expected. Personally, I think that could be actually interesting for a company like Starbucks. They've got so many Chinese stores, so many more than they had in the past. But anyway, they're boosting this because of rapidly available and new mobility data. Now, I think this is fascinating because really, if you look at China, they are at all angles trying to do whatever they can to be as smart as possible for their economy. And now this comes after being stupid and locking everything down for 3 years. But They're doing everything they can to promote Tesla. They're doing everything they can to promote investment into China, everything that they can to increase GDP, even to the extent of providing lethal weapons to Russia if it means more GDP for China. Now, the concern, though, is about China's potential strengths becoming more elevated in its relation between not only Russia and China and other regions or other countries in the space, but also Iran. Remember, Iran is actually producing a suicide drone factory in Russia, and China is willing to work with them. Let's take a listen to this. Here is a clip that we'll watch that's useful.
Russia and Putin's hostility and aggression against our country, the United States, has now reached a dangerous new height. Now, tonight, the question is this. What will your President Joe Biden do? Is he going to offer maybe another waiver for the Nord Stream 2 pipeline? Put more sanctions in place? Putin's not going to care because he's selling his energy and getting filthy rich. He's selling it to China, the rest of the world. And all of this comes as a new axis of evil is emerging between these three top geopolitical foes. China's dictator Xi is now scheduled to hold a very rare but significant meeting with Putin in Moscow. So how much you want to bet they'll probably be trading jokes about just how pathetically weak America's president is? This is beyond embarrassing. This is danger. Danger to the safety and security of the entire world. America's enemies are on the move. They are aggressive. They are consolidating power. They're creating partnerships and alliances that the world better take note of while Joe Biden, your president.
I just quickly want to throw in and mention our policies don't exactly help with that. When we sanction China and we pass a CHIPS Act to prevent China from accessing via the free market advanced chips under the guise of national security, all we're doing is pissing off the second largest world economy and forcing them to either steal that technology and then replicate it and basically catch up just as they would have anyway. But it also encourages their relationship building with other countries that are not the United States. I'd much rather be personally partnering with a developing relationship with China rather than all these tariffs and artificial sanctions and restrictions that just embolden China to form relationships with other world powers. Dare I say that Russia and Iran would be world powers. Other countries that don't like us. How about that? Let's keep going. We got like 10 seconds left.
Is asleep at the wheel. Russia and Putin took out an American drone over international waters. And I ask again, Joe Biden, what are you going to do? Russia and Putin's hostility.
All right. Well, the answer is nothing. But then again, we don't want to start World War III. Okay, so look, bottom line out of all of this, yes, the United States will be weakened in its ability to negotiate on a global scale if the dollar is used less, if it's less of an energy purchaser, and if it's more of a sanction first, ask questions later mentality. I think that's bad. The protectionism tends to fail. It creates too much deadweight loss that ultimately we pay for as people who have to pay larger costs for either supply chains being built in different areas. It creates more inflation, and it ultimately weakens our stance on the global stage. So I'm not super optimistic about that. I think there are better ways to solve these issues, but then again, I don't have all the details the government does. So who knows? Maybe you could be hopeful and say, hey, maybe they're doing a good job. Hey, but one thing I will hold out hope for is that maybe Xi Jinping could actually negotiate something with Vladimir Putin and Zelensky. Now we got to talk about Iran playing both sides. For months now, arms trackers have noticed Ukrainian forces using artillery shells, rockets, and motors made in Iran. This trend of Ukrainians potentially using Iranian-manufactured ammunition dates back to the summer of 2022. Iran is definitely not supplying Ukraine directly with ammunition because Iran is trying to help Russia. After all, they're going to Russia, potentially developing suicide drones at a factory that they want to build outside of Moscow. So, which third party is contributing weapons? Well, it's possible Iran is selling weapons to countries that are then donating them to Ukraine. So that way Iran is making money on both sides. It's unknown because you can't really track exactly where all these weapons are going through. Nobody's putting Apple AirTags on this stuff, although I kind of think they should. Russia is pretty reliant on Iran for weapons, not only for those suicide drones, but also guided, GPS-guided drones, propeller-driven cruise missiles, and more. And it's just worth noting that while at the same time Iran is a big partner for Russia, you literally have Iran indirectly partnering with Ukraine. This is how World War III gets worse, when you literally have everybody trying to profit on it. Why does it get worse? Because it keeps going. If countries around the world are profiting off of this, the American industrial complex is profiting off of it, Iran is profiting off of it, China is profiting off of it, they're already sending lethal weapons to Russia. Well, what do you have? You have a situation where nobody is motivated to end the war. The odds of World War III go up because everybody keeps getting more and more insane weaponry. We went from sending boots and helmets to Ukraine to now sending tanks and now fighter jets going to Ukraine. This is so bad because it just keeps everything going on longer. This is what we want to end. Consider, for example, how Iran does this as well. In 1970, Iran seized a BGM-71 tow missile and then just created their own version of it. And they called it the Tupan anti-tank guided missile. They did this in 2011 as well with the Lockheed Martin RQ-170 Sentinel and created their own drone from it. The Ukrainian military has been reporting Pentagon losses of equipment to minimize seizure of equipment. I mean, look, there's so much back and forth going on between data. Nobody really knows what's going on in this fog of war. But the reality is, lots of people are profiting off of it, and there seems to be a lot of motivation to keep this going. This is bad. Now, it's also worth remembering that citizens demand transparency. Where's all of our money going? Remember, we've thrown over $78 billion at Ukraine. Straight up money, financial support, human support, military support, weapon support, everything. Council on Foreign Relations shows we've donated over twice as much as any other collective comparing to the European Union. Twice as much as them. And we're not even in Europe. But anyway, this is a problem. And these are all things that lead to the escalating pain